Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 6th of October of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And probably the most important and the most interesting updates are coming from Kupiansk. When talking about geolocations and the situation in this area, we haven't received nothing during the previous 24 hours, nothing. The only thing we got is just the messages from the reliable Russian sources about the fact that the Russians launched their offensive operation in this direction. The Russians are pushing in direction of Sinkovka, the Russians are pushing in direction of Petropavlovsk, and also the Russians are trying to enter the Kupiansk itself from the northern direction. As a result of those clashes, the Ukrainians had significant number of losses. There were a lot of killed and a lot of wounded soldiers as a result of those offensive operations. But one more time, we haven't received even a single video confirmation of any attack from this direction. But the only thing we have is the information from very reliable sources. Another reliable sources, Go and Watch, also reported that as a result of strikes, that the situation has been intensified by the Russian side, and that there are very heavy clashes. The only thing we have is that some approximate direction of the Russian attacks, and the most important, that the Russians managed to establish full fire control over the main supply road that use Ukrainians, and this is the supply road that goes from Shevchenkova, and this is the city of Shevchenkova, in direction of Kupiansk. So this area is under complete Russian fire control with artillery systems. And we understand the reason why the area is under fire control, because this is the only road that Ukrainians can use. And don't forget that during the previous months, September, October, the Russians destroy every single bridge and every single let's say pontoon bridge in this area, and currently the Ukrainian forces that located on the Russian side of Oskol River has no support and supply from the mainland. So this is the situation about this territory. Of course, it's very difficult to understand whether it's true or not. I thought a lot how to call this video, but I wanted to call this video or to place the thumbnail like the greatest Russian offensive, but yet we don't know exactly what is happening there. And this might be just a regular speculation to force the Ukrainians to start making some mistakes. Later this evening we also got another update, like few hours later after those two updates, that the Russians launched their offensive operation also from Yagidna, Novotarasovka in direction of Kislovka, Kotlarovka, Stepova, Novoselka. And as a result of fierce clashes, the Russians managed even to enter the city village by the name of Ivanovka, this one. So as a result of clashes from this direction, the Russians have already established control over at least one city. And the main purpose of this attack, of course, is to establish control over supply road N26, and after that to move further along the road in direction of Petropavlovka and along the railways in direction of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. So significant attacks that comes from this area from the Russian side. And of course, another direction of Russian attack is from Raigorodka, Kuzyumovka, Novoselovka in direction of Sinkova. How to understand whether it's true or just the Russian special operation to force the Ukrainians to make mistakes? We can judge about the situation when we don't have video confirmations based on some kind of other evidence that we can find from the open source. And the most probably important evidence is the Ministry of Defense report, one of the most important. I'll remind you that, for example, yesterday the Russians reported that as a result of clashes in the area of in the Kupiansk direction, the Ukrainians lost 170 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems. Basically, those were the heaviest losses of the Ukrainian forces since the beginning of the special military operation on this direction. So we can use these numbers as some kind of evidence. When talking about today's numbers, the Russians published the numbers for entire week, as I understand. By that, they tried to hide the real situation in this area. We need to wait for tomorrow, and tomorrow we're going to receive more updates about the number of losses from the Ukrainian side and about the situation on the ground. And if the Russians establish control even of a single city anyway, tomorrow or the day after, we would start receiving more and more updates about the situation in this area. The most important evidence that the Russians launched offensive operation in this area is the words of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Sergei Shoigu, and he told a very important thing. He reported that the Russians by of today managed to create up to 9 9 reserve regiments. And he added a very important word, that all these regiments, 9 reserved regiments, were created for every single direction that currently have in special military operation. So the Russians created 9 reserved regiments, but when talking about direction, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, there are 6 directions: Kupiansk, Liman, Donetsk, South Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson direction. So as I understand, today the Ministry of Defense also reported that there are 3 additional directions that the Russians haven't started using yet, and this might be Sumy direction, Kharkiv direction, and even Chernihiv direction as well. So as I understand, the late autumn and winter campaigns are going to be very interesting. And the third evidence that the Russians have started a very powerful attack in Kupiansk direction is missile strikes that took place this night in this area, in Kharkiv to be more precise. The Ukrainian sources published a lot of videos of results of Iskander strikes and these in Kupiansk, in Kharkiv, my bad. As you can see, as a result of one of those strikes, almost the entire building was reduced to ruins. The Russian sources have already reported that the strike was made against the concentration of Ukrainian forces. We have another video from the same area, but maybe from another angle. As you can see on this video, there is a very big hole in the intersection of roads between the buildings, and one of the buildings was very damaged. The Russian sources are saying that strike was made against the concentration of Ukrainian forces. I completely disagree with this piece of information, because I don't think that it's like a normal way. It's too risky, you know, that it's too risky to attack with Iskander against just a regular concentration of forces in the residential area of Kharkiv. There might be significant number of casualties among civilians, significant, even hundreds or maybe thousands of people could die just as a result of attack of Iskander strike in the central part of Kharkiv. So this is the reason I don't agree that the Russians discovered the concentration of Ukrainian forces, because those reports about the concentration of forces we got not from the Ministry of Defense, but from the regular asynchronous sources and so on. As I understand, before the launching of greatest offensive operation in Kupiansk, the Russians managed to discover the command center of tactical group of Kupiansk, and as a result of Iskander strike, the Russians managed to cut the head of entire Kharkiv army, or entire army or commanders who control Kupiansk direction. And as soon as they managed to do this, the Russians launched a very powerful attack, and currently we're the witnesses of at least messages in Telegram about something very big that currently take place exactly in Kupiansk direction. So we'll see, we'll follow the situation. Anyway, sooner or later we're going to receive more updates, and then we're going to have a possibility to make more conclusions about the situation. Now let's move from top to the south, and the next area we're going to talk about is Siversk-Liman direction. And today we got also a lot of updates, but mainly from the Ukrainian sources. The Ukrainians published significant number of videos of strikes, FPV drone strikes against the Russian positions in the vicinity of Priville, Kremenna, Dibrova, and this is we can say a very unique and very new region for us, because if you remember, for example, I don't remember when exactly we got any geolocations from Priville. The last geolocation I remember is the Russian offensive, or the end of Russian offensive and storm operation of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. After that we haven't received nothing, right? And now we see like a lot of strikes, and those strikes were made and implemented by the Ukrainian 12th Brigade Azov, and this is the newly created or recreated brigade after the Battle of Mariupol. And maybe the Ukrainians have some plans to counterattack the Russians while operation in Kupiansk, and they will try to attack to force them, maybe to the Russians to use some reserves in this direction. And obviously the main direction and the main strike is going to take place from Bilogorovka in direction of Lysychansk, and of course Lysychansk oil refinery. So this is possible Ukrainian counterattack while the Russians try to develop their positions in Kupiansk and develop their offensive there. When talking about Siversk area, the Russians made few missile strikes, few artillery strikes, just a regular routine, regular artillery duels with the purpose to slow down and to pin down the Ukrainians and not to allow them to feel themselves comfortable on this direction. When talking about Bakhmut area, today we got significant number of Ukrainian FPV drone strikes. So we see that Ukrainians continue using their pattern. Every time they want to launch another attack against the Russian forces, before any attack, they start bombing and attacking the Russian supply roads, the Russian light vehicles, the Russian supply track, evacuation machines, armored vehicles, artillery systems, with significant number of FPV drones. And currently we are the witnesses of these strikes. So that means that in a day or in a two, maybe in three, the Ukrainians will launch another attempt to attack the Russian positions along the railways. The last time we saw such a big activity of the Ukrainian forces in this direction took place right before the Ukrainians launched their first attempts to storm Klishchiivka, when they were trying to cross canal between, let's say, between Pritiechina and Klishchiivka. So at the beginning of that operation. Then there was like ground operation, and now we see more attempts from the Ukrainian side. Very interesting updates are coming from Klishchiivka itself. If you remember, during the morning video we discussed that as a result of clashes, probably the Russians were forced to step back from this tree line. According to some Russian sources, this information was confirmed, but yet I haven't colored this territory in yellow because we need more time to wait to understand, get more evidence of that. And somewhere at noontime we got a very interesting update from the Russian sources. The Russians published the video how they were counterattacking and storming the Ukrainian stronghold and checkpoint along the railways. First, the Russians were using the FPV drones to suppress the Ukrainian defense, to pin down the Ukrainian soldiers, and after that just 2 or 3 soldiers launched offensive operation, and as a result of that attack the Russians managed to capture entire positions and to force the Ukrainians to step back. So at least we can confirm that at least the Russians still have at least partial control over the positions along the railways. When talking about the Ministry of Defense report, today they provide us the weekly numbers, and the numbers are very heavy, but for week we need more data to compare, to analyze. Furthermore, the Russians continue attacking the main logistic hub, the main logistic roads of the Ukrainians that located in the city by the name of Ivanovskaya, and or at least in the city that left from Ivanovskaya, because during these areas under very heavy fire from the Russian forces, and so like very difficult to use this area, but the Ukrainians don't have any other position and any other option how to support their forces in Klishchiivka. Now we are moving further to the south, to central Donetsk direction, to the Donetsk, let's say, city, and today we got a lot of very interesting and very weird geolocations from the Ukrainian side and from the Russian side as well, and probably the most interesting geolocation we got from the city by the name of Bitmanova, the city that located between Verkhnetoretskaya, Pantelemonivka, and Yasinovata. On this video we see how the Russians were making some military exercises. Almost the same video or similar video we saw a few days ago from Ukrainian side, when the Ukrainians had military exercises, and as a result of Tornado air strike almost 60 up to 60 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. On this video we see the same story, but now we see how the Russians had military exercises. The Ukrainians were flying above them, they tracked the entire situation, control, and at some point they start bombing and attacking the Russians with HIMARS missiles. There were 2 explosions, 2 rockets the Ukrainians who used for that purposes. We don't know the number of losses, but the Ukrainians, based on this geolocated footage, managed to calculate the number of losses, and according to the Ukrainians, as a result of those 2 strikes, the Russians lost up to 20 soldiers and 15 soldiers were wounded. So this is probably epic fail, obviously, and the worst part of that strike is not that the Russians still concentrate forces. Obviously, either the Russians and the Ukrainians still concentrate their forces, and this is the reason why we saw such videos in the past. The most weird thing for me when talking about this strike is the distance between this military exercises camp to the combat line. If we calculate the distance between the area of strike and, let's say, Avdiivka, then we can see that the distance is less than 10 kilometers. Imagine yourself that the Russians created a camp, military camp, within a distance of 10 kilometers from the combat line. It's a very weird situation. I can't explain you what was the purpose of this. Maybe the Russians tried to concentrate forces before the next attack. Who knows? But this is too wrong to establish such a military camp so close to the combat line, where the Ukrainians have possibilities to attack this military camp, not just even with HIMARS missiles. They could do this even with M777 howitzer. They could do this even with the regular FPV drones, because the distance is too short. It was too risky to do this, but for some reason the Russians took a decision to do this, and as a result of that, a lot of soldiers were killed. So we'll see what is going to be next. When talking about Marinka and South Donetsk direction, very fierce clashes continues for the city by the name of Novomikhailivka. Today some Russian authors published a very interesting video that as a result of fierce clashes in this area, up to 20 Ukrainian soldiers took a decision to surrender. The author of that video reported that that event took place exactly in the area of Marinka. I put this icon softly on the map because I'm not sure where exactly this happened. The only thing I know that recently and those days there were very heavy clashes and Russian assault operation against the stronghold by the name of Zverinets. So I just make my conclusion that these prisoners of war was exactly from this stronghold as a result of Russian pressure. They took a decision to surrender because they didn't have any support and help from the from the mainland. We remember that the Russians managed to cut them from the mainland by establishing fire control and demine the fields. So they were basically encircled and they took a decision to surrender, and this is probably the result of that Russian operation for the battle for Zverinets. So as I understand, if it's true, tomorrow and the day after we're going to receive more updates and we will be able to color this entire area into red color, and then the Russians will be able to start the second phase of the storming this city by the name of Novomikhailivka. The Ukrainians tried to repel the Russian attacks, and today they published the video how they managed to discover the Russian positions in the city Solotke that located right in front of Novomikhailivka. As a result of FPV drone attack of 79th Brigade, the Russians lost another personal carrier or supply truck in this direction. So the clashes continues and we expect more updates from this area. Also the Russians published some videos, geolocated videos from the western part of Marinka. There is nothing to talk about, just to see the real Russian position, nothing more. Now we are moving to Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Today the Russians published significant number of strikes, made significant number of strikes with all types of weapons they have against the city or against what left from the city of Urozhaine. The Russians were using TOS flamethrower systems, the Russians were using just the regular artillery rounds. So the Russians continue reducing the city to ruins. We understand that the main purpose of the Russian attacks is to force the Ukrainians to step back from this area, to create something like a scorched land barrier between the Ukrainian positions and the Russians. They just want to feel themselves to be on the secure side, on the safe side. The Russians are not going to counterattack. If they will attack, if they are going to attack, they will attack from Novomikhailivka, trying to penetrate the Ukrainians in their flank. They're not going to attack these ruins, but they need to have a barrier. They need to have a barrier completely empty from the Ukrainians, just to be on the safe side. And this is exactly what they're trying to do. And as I understand, if the Russians continue pressure the same way, obviously the Ukrainians will be forced to step back. They will have just few soldiers. They will have the number of forces that is not enough to continue offensive operation in direction of Zavitna Bazhanya, Staromlynovka and Kremenchuk. Now we are moving to Zaporozhye area, to Vremivka. We have finished with Vremivka. When talking about the Zaporozhye area, there are no changes in this area, just few geolocated videos from both sides. The Ukrainians published another video how they were moving along the trenches, to be more precise, the forces of 71st Jaeger Brigade. They published the video from trenches, how they were moving. So we just adjusted the combat line and moved yellow color a little bit to the south, like showing that this territory is under Ukrainian control. Also, the Ukrainians made few attempts to attack the Russian positions from Novodanilovka in direction of Kopony. This operation we discussed already. During the previous day, they probably finished the concentration of forces, and today, these days, or maybe tomorrow, or maybe today, the Ukrainians made an attempt to attack, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians were completely defeated. Some sources are saying that the Ukrainians lost up to 20 armored vehicles, significant number of infantry, but the only thing we got is just the a video how the Russians during the night were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian edge positions, and as a result of those strikes, as you can see, there were a lot of secondary explosions, there were a lot of strikes with stealth flamethrower systems, and maybe this is the area where Ukrainians were planning or trying to concentrate their forces, and as a result of strike against this territory, maybe it is exactly the area where the Ukrainians had those significant losses. Very difficult to understand, but we see the pressure, we see the fire, and maybe this is like the results. And that's it, no problems about no more movements from the Ukrainian side, just regular clashes, regular artillery bombings from the Russian side, and without any attempt to penetrate the Russians' defense belt. When talking about Kherson direction, the same story. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainians in Mykolaievka, Adrada-Kamyanka, in the Ukrainian reconnaissance teams and sabotage teams in the islands, but without any details, without any numbers, just regular bombing. Sometimes I have feeling that maybe the Russians are attacking just because they know they can, and to kill any feelings and any wishes from Ukrainian side to start any movements, because I believe if you see FAB 500 explosion in front of your eyes, I believe that you don't have any wish, any need to continue any offensive operation. The only thing you want is to dig in deeper and to stay somewhere below the surface and somewhere underground and to wait for the next day. So maybe this is the thing that the Russians are planning to do in this direction. And one more time, I'll remind you that during the previous night, the Russians made significant number of strikes against the port infrastructure of Ukrainian forces along the Dunabi River. As a result of those strikes, a lot of energy, a lot of facilities, port facilities were destroyed, and we understand that the Russians are trying to suppress and destroy the Ukrainian infrastructure and to completely collapse any sea trade from the Ukrainian side. So we'll see whether the Russians are able to achieve some results or not. And the final update, one more time, that the Russians took a decision to redeploy their fleet from Sevastopol to Feodosia and Novorossiysk, just to save the fleet and to be on the safe side. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.